You think the universe exists in a straightforward way. There is space, filled with things. There is time, moving forward. The universe is there whether you look at it or not, doing its thing, unfolding moment by moment. You might not know everything about it, but at least you think you know what it means for it to exist. That confidence is the illusion, because the moment you ask what it actually means for something to exist, the picture you were taught starts to fall apart. Not because the universe is vague or mystical, but because your everyday idea of existence was never designed to handle how reality actually works. You were taught to think that objects exist independently, sitting in space, persisting through time. A chair exists, a planet exists, a particle exists. Space is the container. Time is the timeline. Existence means being located somewhere, at some moment. Physics does not use that definition. Physics does not begin with objects. It begins with measurements, with interactions, with events. And when you describe reality in those terms, the idea that the universe exists as a collection of things in a container becomes unnecessary, and eventually impossible to maintain. Let's start with something simple. When do you say that an object exists? When you can interact with it, when it leaves marks, when it affects something else. A chair exists because you can sit on it. A planet exists because it bends light and pulls on other objects. A particle exists because it produces detectable effects. Existence in physics is not a passive state. It is relational. An electron is not something you can point to sitting somewhere. It is something you infer from interactions. Tracks in a detector. Energy transfers. Scattering patterns. The thing is a summary of relationships, not a little bead hiding underneath. This matters because once existence becomes relational, the idea of the universe existing as a static collection of objects stops making sense. What exists are patterns of interaction. Now add space and time to this picture, and the problem deepens. You think space is where things exist, but physics does not treat space as an independent stage. Space is part of the same structure as time, and that structure does not sit underneath matter. It responds to it. Mass and energy change the geometry of space-time. Space-time tells mass and energy how to move. There is no separation between container and contents. The universe is not something sitting inside space and time. Space and time are part of the universe's behavior. Already, the everyday picture is gone. Time fares even worse. You think time is a background that ticks forward, allowing existence to refresh itself moment by moment. Physics does not describe anything like that. Time is not a universal flow. Different clocks measure different amounts of time depending on their paths. There is no master clock keeping the universe synchronized. If existence depended on a universal now, physics would collapse. But it doesn't. It works precisely because no such now exists. Two observers moving relative to each other do not agree on what exists right now. What one observer says is happening, another can say has already happened or has not yet happened. Both descriptions are correct. The laws of physics allow both. This alone should make you suspicious of the idea that the universe exists one moment at a time. Once you remove the universal present, the idea that the universe is constantly coming into existence loses its footing. There is no privileged slice of reality that gets to be the real one. Past, present, and future are all part of the same structure. This is where people usually resist hardest. They say, surely the past exists, but the future does not. Surely reality is incomplete. Surely the universe is being created as time passes. Physics never says that. That idea came from experience, not from measurement. You remember the past, you do not remember the future. So the past feels solid, and the future feels empty. Physics does not confuse memory with existence. Events in the future affect present calculations just as legitimately as events in the past. Light from distant galaxies takes time to reach you. Predictions about future measurements are part of the same framework as explanations of past ones. The equations do not privilege one direction of time over the other. This is why physicists talk about space-time as a four-dimensional structure. Not because it sounds impressive, but because it is the only way to describe reality without smuggling in human assumptions. In that structure, events do not pop into existence as time flows. They are located, they are related, they are part of the whole. This is the sense in which the universe does not exist the way you think it does. It does not exist as a sequence of moments replacing each other. It does not exist as a set of things sitting in a box. It does not exist as a story being written. It exists as a structure of relations. From inside that structure, you experience change. You experience memory. You experience anticipation. You experience a sense of now. None of that is denied, but none of that defines existence itself. Existence is not about what you are currently experiencing. It is about what the structure allows and relates. Once you accept this, a lot of familiar questions stop making sense. You stop asking when the universe began to exist in its current moment. You stop asking what exists right now across the cosmos. You stop asking where things are really located in an absolute sense. Those questions assumed a kind of existence the universe does not use. The universe does not exist as a collection of things at a moment. It exists as a pattern of events related across space-time. Objects, moments, and locations are conveniences you extract from that pattern, not ingredients the universe starts with. That realization is unsettling only if you insist on keeping the old picture alive. Once you let it go, the new picture is not mysterious. It is precise. The universe doesn't exist the way you think, because thinking evolved to simplify reality, not to represent it faithfully. Physics is what happens when you stop trusting that simplification and start following the structure instead. If the universe does not exist as a collection of objects sitting in space at a particular time, then the way you locate yourself inside it also has to change. You feel like you are here, now, occupying a point in space, watching time move past you. That feeling is powerful. It is also misleading. Physics does not describe you as a thing located at a moment. It describes you as a process extended across space-time. A world line, a continuous chain of events with strong correlations between them. Your body is not something that persists while time flows. It is something that is defined by what happens along that line. This matters because it means now is not where existence happens. Now is where your awareness happens. Your brain receives information from the past via signals, light, sound, nerve impulses. It stitches those signals together into a coherent picture and calls that picture the present. That construction feels immediate and authoritative, but physics does not recognize it as a feature of the universe. It recognizes it as a feature of you. This is why different observers can disagree about what exists right now without contradiction. There is no universal present for existence to cling to. There are only local perspectives, each with their own slice through space-time. Once you see that, the idea that the universe exists moment by moment becomes impossible to defend. There is no single moment to anchor it to. Instead, what exists are events and the relationships between them. An event is something simple, a particle interaction, a clock tick, a neuron firing. Physics does not ask whether an event is happening now. It asks how that event is related to others, by distance, by duration, by causal constraint. This is why the universe does not need to be updated. Nothing is being refreshed. Nothing is waiting to happen. The structure is already there, with internal relations that allow prediction, explanation, and consistency. From inside that structure, you experience change because you do not have access to all of it. You move along your world line. You encounter events in sequence. That sequence feels like reality unfolding. It isn't. It is you discovering different parts of the structure. This distinction is subtle and brutal. At the same time, it does not deny your experience. It explains it. Now consider how this reframes the idea of the universe. You were taught to think of the universe as the totality of everything that exists right now. But right now is not a universal concept, so the definition quietly collapses. The universe is not everything that exists at a moment. It is the entire space-time structure, all events, all relations, past, future, and everything in between. Not because they are all experienced, but because they are all part of the same system. This is why questions like, does the future exist, sound meaningful, but aren't. They assume existence is tied to present experience. Physics does not make that assumption. Existence is tied to being part of the structure described by the theory. The future exists in exactly the same way the past exists, not as something you can access, but as something that has a location in space-time and relationships to other events. The discomfort comes from confusing epistemology with ontology, what you can know with what is. You do not know the future. That does not mean it does not exist. You do not know what is happening right now on the far side of the universe either. That ignorance does not make it unreal. Physics is merciless about this. It does not elevate human access to a criterion for existence. Now let's push this one step further, because this is where the phrase, "the universe doesn't exist the way you think," becomes unavoidable. If existence is relational, and space and time are part of the same dynamic structure, then there is no single, privileged description of the universe. There is no God's eye picture where everything sits neatly arranged. There are only descriptions relative to reference frames. This is not relativism in the philosophical sense. It is invariance. Different observers use different coordinates, but they agree on what can be measured. The invariant relationships are what physics calls real. Reality is not what stays the same in your picture. It is what stays the same when the picture changes. That is the deepest shift most people never make. They think reality is what they imagine when they close their eyes. Physics says reality is what survives transformation. Once you see that, the universe stops being a thing you can picture and becomes something you can only describe mathematically. That feels like a loss, until you realize it is also a gain. You lose the illusion of a simple picture and gain a framework that actually works. This is why the universe keeps refusing to sit still in your imagination. Every time you try to pin it down as stuff in space over time, it slips away. Because that was never what it was. The universe does not exist the way you think it does, because your way of thinking assumes existence is passive and localized. Physics shows it is active and relational. What exists is not a moment. At some point, if you're paying attention, you realize that the resistance you feel is no longer about physics at all. It's about identity, about where you thought you stood in the universe. Because once existence stops meaning being a thing right now, the place you thought you occupied becomes strangely unstable. You thought you were a thing inside the universe, looking out at it. Physics quietly tells you that you are not inside it in that way. You are part of the structure you're trying to imagine. This is not poetry. It is a consequence. When physics describes you, it does not describe a self moving through a pre-existing reality. It describes a sequence of events, chemical reactions, neural firings, information transfers, all of them strung together along a world line. The you that feels continuous is a pattern of correlations, not a persistent object. That feels unsettling only because you were taught that objects are fundamental and patterns are secondary. Physics reverses that hierarchy. Patterns are fundamental. Objects are approximations. This is why the universe refuses to give you a single, stable picture of itself. Every picture you try to hold on to depends on freezing something that physics says cannot be frozen. A moment, a position, a thing. You want existence to be something you can point at. Physics says existence is something you infer from consistency. Now consider how deeply this changes the idea of observation. You were taught implicitly that the universe exists independently and observation just reveals it. Then you were taught a little later that observation somehow affects reality, as if this were a strange quantum quirk layered on top. Both of those pictures miss the point. Observation is not a magical act. It is an interaction, an event. When you observe something, you are not peeking at a hidden object. You are participating in a relationship. The result you call what exists is the outcome of that interaction. This does not mean reality depends on consciousness. That's another illusion people cling to. It means reality is not made of passive things waiting to be noticed. It is made of interactions that leave records. Records are everything. The past feels real because records of it exist. Fossils, memories, photographs, scars. The future feels unreal because records of it do not yet exist for you. That difference feels ontological. It isn't. It's informational. Physics does not define existence by records. It defines existence by participation in the structure. Records are just one kind of event among many. Once you see that, the universe stops looking like a warehouse of objects and starts looking like a network of constraints. Certain events can follow others. Certain influences can propagate. Certain correlations persist. Others do not. Existence is what fits consistently into that network. This is why the universe cannot be captured by a snapshot. Any snapshot you imagine privileges a particular frame, a particular now, a particular observer. Physics does not allow that privilege. Reality is what remains invariant when you strip all of that away. And this is where the phrase, "the universe doesn't exist the way you think," becomes precise rather than provocative. You thought existence was static. It isn't. You thought it was local. It isn't. You thought it was tied to the present. It isn't. Existence is global, relational, and structural. The universe does not exist as a set of things. It exists as a system of relations that obey rules. That system does not need to be updated. It does not need to be refreshed. It does not need to wait for time to pass. Those were stories you used to make sense of limited access. The universe is not being rendered moment by moment. You are. Your experience updates because information reaches you sequentially. Signals take time. Memory accumulates. Anticipation projects forward. That process feels like reality unfolding. It is not reality unfolding. It is you discovering different parts of the structure. Once you stop mistaking discovery for creation, the entire picture shifts. Nothing is popping into existence. Nothing is fading out of existence. There is no edge of reality advancing forward. There is no blank future waiting to be filled. There is a space-time structure containing all events and all relations. And you are embedded in it with partial information. That's it. This is why physics feels so relentlessly impersonal. It is not interested in what feels central. It is interested in what remains consistent across perspectives. And the consistent picture is this. The universe does not exist as a story. Stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. Stories unfold. Stories are told from a point of view. The universe has none of that. It is not told. It is not unfolding. It is not waiting. It simply is. And the more carefully you examine it, the clearer it becomes that the way you were taught to think about existence was never meant to survive scrutiny at this level. It was a user interface, a very good one, a very convincing one, and a deeply misleading one. At the end of all this, there is no final twist, no hidden mechanism waiting to be revealed, no deeper layer where the universe suddenly becomes familiar again. That expectation that there must be something intuitive underneath is the last illusion. There isn't. The universe does not exist the way you think it does because the way you think was never meant to describe existence at this scale. It was meant to help you act, decide, survive. It gives you objects because objects are useful. It gives you a present because coordination requires it. It gives you a flowing time because planning depends on it. Physics takes those tools away not because they are wrong in practice, but because they are wrong in principle. Once you accept that, everything you've been wrestling with settles into place. The universe is not incomplete. It is not waiting. It is not becoming. It does not need moments to exist. It exists as a total structure of relations. This does not mean nothing changes. Change is a relationship between events. This does not mean nothing happens. Events are the basic currency of reality. It does not mean experience is fake. Experience is a process that occurs along certain world lines. What it means is that existence is not tied to what is happening now. Because now is not a feature of the universe. It is a feature of information processing. You were taught to imagine the universe as something that refreshes itself every instant, like frames in a movie. That image fails because movies need projectors. The universe does not. There is no cosmic refresh rate. There is no advancing edge of reality. There is no unfinished section waiting to load. There is just a space-time structure with internal consistency in which events are related in lawful ways. From inside that structure, you experience life as a sequence. From the perspective of the structure, sequence is not fundamental. It is emergent. This is why physics keeps sounding cold when people first encounter it. It removes the idea that existence is centered on experience. But it does not remove experience. It explains it. Your life is not diminished by being part of a larger structure. It is defined by it. You matter not because the universe waits for you, but because you are one of the things it contains. Your thoughts, your decisions, your struggles, your insights are events like any other. They have consequences. They leave records. They shape correlations. Nothing about that is erased by abandoning the old picture of existence. What is erased is the illusion that reality owes you a particular narrative. The universe does not exist as a collection of objects sitting in time. It does not exist as a story unfolding from past to future. It does not exist as something that is more real now than at any other coordinate. It exists as a structure that can be described consistently from many perspectives, none of which are privileged. That is the truth being revealed here. Not a mystical one, not a poetic one, a technical one. The reason this feels so unsettling is not because it is absurd, it is because it is precise. You were taught a version of existence that made sense to creatures with limited information, moving slowly in weak gravity. That version worked until you tried to stretch it to the scale of the universe. It snapped. Physics did not break reality. It broke the picture. And once the picture is gone, what remains is not confusion. It is clarity without comfort. The universe does not exist the way you think it does because thinking was never the right tool for that job. Measurement was. Mathematics was. Consistency across perspectives was. When you follow those tools instead of intuition, you arrive at a universe that is stranger than expected and far more coherent. A universe that does not wait. A universe that does not unfold. A universe that does not privilege the present. A universe that simply is. And the only mistake was ever thinking it had to be anything else.